The courthouse in Little Creek, Colorado, was the kind of place where time seemed to hang heavy in the air. Its brick walls, faded and warm with decades of history, carried the weight of countless verdicts, but none like this. Outside, a winter wind scoured the streets, rattling old signs and scattering brown leaves across the cracked pavement. Inside, the hallways smelled faintly of polish and coffee, a strange mixture that felt both institutional and intimate, like someone's forgotten kitchen. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocating. Every chair was filled, every eye pointed at the center. Prosecutors shifted uncomfortably behind their papers, whispering among themselves, their voices low and clipped. Defense attorneys sat stiffly, scanning files as if doing so could somehow armor them against the storm that was about to hit. Even the judge, known for his stoic calm, seemed more rigid than usual, his fingers drumming against the desk in a nervous rhythm only he could hear. And then there was Emma Carson. 3 years old, tiny. Her golden curls fell in soft, careless waves around her pale face, and she clutched a worn, stuffed rabbit with a grip that seemed almost desperate. She perched on the witness chair with legs dangling, feet too small to touch the floor, and hands shaking slightly as she hugged her toy closer. Her wide, innocent eyes scanned the courtroom with a mixture of fear and curiosity. She didn't understand the gravity of the room, but she felt it. The tension, the fear, the unspoken secrets, they all pressed down on her small shoulders. The trial was already notorious. In a county that prided itself on quiet civility, this case had splashed across the front pages of every local paper for weeks. Emma's mother, Sarah Carson, had vanished seemingly into thin air. Her father, Mark Carson, had given conflicting statements to the police, some claiming innocence, others hinting at something darker. Witnesses were unreliable. Evidence was sparse. Everyone in the courthouse knew the truth was buried somewhere between lies, fear, and the whispered stories that no one dared confirm out loud. The judge's gavel came down lightly, almost hesitantly. "We will now hear from the witness," he said, his voice calm but edged with a tension that mirrored everyone else. Deputies shuffled near the doors, pens hovered over pads, and the air felt electric. No one wanted this trial. Not the prosecutors, not the defense, not the witnesses, and certainly not Emma. This wasn't just a case about evidence or testimony. It was about a child, a disappearance, and a father whose intentions were shrouded in ambiguity. For some, the thought of bringing Emma into the courtroom made their stomachs turn. For others, it was the only way the truth could ever surface. And yet here she was. The silence that followed the judge's opening was absolute. It pressed against the walls, filled every corner, and held the room hostage. The adults were tense, their whispered anxieties a sharp contrast to the child's quiet, fragile stillness. Emma's eyes flickered from her father to her mother's empty seat in the front row. She had no idea what had happened, no memory beyond the fractured glimpses she'd caught, her mother crying in the car, the whispered arguments, the long stretches of silence that had followed. But she remembered enough to know fear, enough to know something was wrong. Then the courtroom doors opened. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't another deputy. It was K9 Ranger, the county's legendary police dog. A German shepherd with sleek, dark fur and eyes that seemed to hold the calm intensity of someone, or something, that had seen the worst of humanity and still stood unwavering. He walked in with his handler, Officer Daniels, a tall man with a quiet authority that somehow amplified Ranger's presence. The dog's reputation preceded him. He had tracked missing hikers, discovered hidden weapons, and found fugitives who had thought themselves invisible. He had a gift, an instinct so sharp it bordered on uncanny. The room seemed to exhale as Ranger's paws hit the polished floor. Deputies straightened. Prosecutors leaned forward, drawn in by something primal and magnetic. And Emma, who had been clutching her rabbit, stiffened for only a moment, then her body relaxed. Ranger sat beside her, alert but calm, his head tilting slightly as he regarded the tiny girl. There was no fear in his eyes, only recognition. Emma reached out her small hand, brushing the fur of his head, and a ripple of something unspoken passed between them. The court held its collective breath. A dog had never been a witness before, and yet in that moment he seemed more attentive, more trustworthy than any human in the room. The judge leaned forward, speaking softly, almost tenderly. "Emma, can you tell us anything that happened?" Emma looked around. She blinked up at the towering adults, their faces serious, impatient, and frightening. She glanced at her father, who looked tense, his jaw tight, knuckles white as he gripped the armrest of his chair. She looked toward the empty chair where her mother should have been. And then she looked at Ranger. Her voice was barely audible, trembling with all the innocence and courage a 3-year-old could muster. "Show Ranger," she whispered. The courtroom froze. Time seemed to stretch. The judge's gavel hovered in midair. Deputies exchanged uncertain glances. Even the air itself seemed to wait, suspended, as if leaning in to hear what would happen next. Show Ranger what? The words were simple, but the implication was seismic. Emma's tiny figure trembled, her eyes wide, and Ranger's ears twitched as though he understood perfectly. Officer Daniels crouched slightly, whispering to the dog in a voice only he could hear. Ranger responded with a subtle nod of his head, muscles tensing, gaze fixed, not on the judge, not on the attorneys, not even on the father, but on a point across the courtroom. His growl, low and deliberate, vibrated through the polished floorboards, reaching the edge of everyone's nerves. Mark Carson's face drained of color. His mouth opened to speak, but no words came. The gavel fell, barely audible over the growing tension, and the room erupted into murmurs, hushed yet frantic. Emma remained still, clutching her rabbit, but her eyes gleamed with an eerie clarity. It was then that the courtroom realized. This wasn't just another case. This wasn't about testimony, evidence, or legal maneuvering. This was about the invisible truth only a child and a dog could reveal. The tension crackled like a live wire. Every adult in the room felt the magnetic pull of Ranger's unwavering focus. Emma's tiny whisper had set something in motion, something raw, something unavoidable. The air felt heavier now, charged with a mixture of fear, anticipation, and the silent understanding that what was about to happen could change everything. The judge cleared his throat, but even he seemed hesitant. We will proceed carefully," he said. Every word sounded brittle, fragile, as though the room itself was bracing for a storm. Deputies shuffled closer to the father. The press leaned forward, sensing history unfolding in real time. Emma's small fingers tightened around her rabbit, and Ranger shifted his stance, ready, alert, sensing the invisible threads of danger and truth interwoven in the space around him. And then silence. Not the kind of silence that signals calm, but the kind that grips the chest, squeezes the air from the lungs, and whispers. Something is about to happen, and there is no turning back. All eyes were on the small figure in the chair and the dog sitting obediently at her side. The judge, the attorneys, the deputies, even the journalists, they all knew deep down that whatever happened next could not be undone. The courtroom had held many trials, many hearings, many testimonies, but none like this. Emma's voice broke the stillness again. "Show Ranger," she repeated, firmer this time, a spark of determination in her eyes. And in that moment, the courthouse was no longer just a building. It was the stage for a drama that would unfold in ways no one, not even the most seasoned law enforcement officer, could predict. The quiet courtroom had held its breath. Until a 3-year-old told a dog 2 words, Ranger's paws clicked softly against the polished courtroom floor, but with every step the air seemed to thrum with anticipation. He was no ordinary dog. Every officer in the county knew that. Locals whispered about his almost uncanny instincts. Some called him a miracle worker. Others said he had a sixth sense that couldn't be explained. Ranger didn't just track criminals. He found missing people, discovered weapons in places humans would never think to look. And once, in a story retold around town like folklore, he led deputies to a hidden hiker trapped in the snow for 2 nights, alone and fatting. But Ranger had never been in a courtroom before. Never had he been called to witness in a legal case. much less a case like this. Yet here he was, sitting beside 3-year-old Emma Carson, whose tiny fingers curled around her rabbit as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the world. The judge cleared his throat. "Officer Daniels, if you would, please have the dog remain calm." Daniels gave a brief nod and crouched slightly beside Ranger. "He's calm," Daniels said, his voice low and even, "but he's aware." Aware? That single word was enough to make the room go silent again. Every adult present understood its implication. Ranger knew something. He wasn't acting out of fear or training, he was sensing. The dog's muscles tensed slightly, his ears flicking toward the defendant, Mark Carson, who now sat rigid, his hands folded tightly in front of him. There was something in Ranger's gaze, a steady, penetrating focus, that made Mark shift uncomfortably, a subtle twitch in his shoulder, a clenching of his jaw. Emma's eyes met Ranger. She didn't look at her father, she didn't look at the judge, she didn't even glance at the rows of attorneys. She looked at Ranger, and for a moment the entire courtroom seemed suspended in a bubble of recognition between child and dog. "Emma," the judge said gently, leaning forward, "can you tell us what happened?" Emma tilted her head slightly, her small lips trembling. Then, as if the words had been waiting in her mind for years, she whispered, "Show Ranger." The room froze. It wasn't a command for the adults, it wasn't a plea for help. It was a deliberate instruction to the dog, and Ranger responded immediately. His head shot up, ears perking, muscles coiling like a spring ready to release. The growl that followed was low, deliberate, and dangerous, not aggression toward the child, but a signal that the dog had detected something invisible to everyone else. The judge, the jury, the attorneys, all of them felt it, felt the shift. A professional hush fell over the courtroom, so heavy it pressed against the walls. Even Mark Carson's defense attorney paled, realizing instinctively that the courtroom dynamic had just changed in a way no human could control. Daniels whispered under his breath, mostly to himself, "He's never done this in court before. He's alerting." The words seemed to hang in the air. The assistant prosecutor leaned over to whisper to the lead attorney, "He's alerting. For what?" Nobody had to answer. The answer was written in Ranger's posture. The dog's body was rigid, his gaze fixed on Mark Carson like a hunter closing in on prey. Every hair on his back stood slightly on end. His growl continued, low and steady, reverberating through the floorboards. Emma, sensing the tension, leaned closer to Ranger. She whispered again, "Show him, he knows." It was like a key turning in a lock. Ranger's handler, Officer Daniels, swallowed hard. "He knows," he muttered almost to himself. "He knows something's wrong." The deputies at the back of the courtroom exchanged subtle, urgent glances. Ranger didn't move toward Mark Carson aggressively, but the growl was unmistakable. The dog had detected the presence of something forbidden, something dangerous, something hidden. Mark's face drained of color. His hands, which had been clenched so tightly they were nearly white, trembled ever so slightly. His mouth opened, then closed. He tried to speak, but no sound came out. For the first time, the courtroom realized this was no ordinary hearing. This was a confrontation between instinct and deception, between innocence and concealment. The judge, normally composed, leaned forward in his chair, his voice soft but firm. "Please remain calm," he said. His eyes flicked from Ranger to Emma to Mark. "We will proceed carefully." The assistant prosecutor whispered under her breath, "I've never seen him do that, never in my career." Daniels crouched a little closer to Ranger, murmuring commands, but Ranger's attention never wavered. He was completely locked on Mark Carson. His growl continued, a low vibration that made the hair on the backs of everyone's neck stand up. Emma's tiny voice cut through again, stronger this time. "Show Ranger." A ripple of tension swept through the courtroom. The bailiff shifted nervously, the stenographer paused mid-keystroke, and reporters leaned forward, sensing that something historic was unfolding. Ranger's gaze, fixed and unflinching, carried a weight no human could ignore. It was as if the dog was silently proclaiming, "I know what you did." Then something remarkable happened. Ranger shifted slightly, pawing at the floor, a deliberate motion that the handler recognized immediately as the dog's trained signal. Ranger had been trained to indicate the presence of human remains, to alert authorities when a missing person or foul play was involved. A hush fell over the courtroom. Gasps rippled through the audience. The judge leaned back, a hand over his mouth, his eyes wide. The attorneys froze, some instinctively reaching for their pens as if documentation could somehow anchor them to reality. Emma's father, Mark, paled further, beads of sweat forming along his hairline. His defense attorney whispered something inaudible, probably a desperate attempt to regain control of the narrative. But Ranger didn't care about narratives. He didn't care about legal strategies or courtroom decorum. He only cared about the truth, and the truth was pointing directly at Mark. Emma's small hand trembled slightly as she patted Ranger's head. She had no fear of him. She trusted him more than any adult in the room. She knew something adults didn't. Ranger could find the truth, even if no one else could. Then in one fluid motion, Ranger stood. Not aggressively, but with a tension so palpable it was almost unbearable. His paws scraped lightly against the floor, and every head in the courtroom turned to follow him. The growl ceased for a heartbeat, replaced by a piercing, unblinking stare. Ranger's body language was unmistakable: focus, alert, ready. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing inward as the tension built. The judge adjusted in his chair, and deputies instinctively moved closer to Mark, unsure if the dog would act or merely observe. Every journalist leaned forward, pens poised, cameras clicking silently in anticipation. Emma, tiny and fragile, looked up at Ranger. "Show him," she whispered again. "He knows." The words were simple, but their weight was extraordinary. Ranger's eyes softened just slightly toward Emma, acknowledging her guidance, then snapped back to Mark Carson. A warning tremor seemed to pass through the courtroom like electricity. Even the air felt charged, thick with suspense and unspoken truths. Mark's mouth opened. She's confused," he stammered, voice shaking. "She doesn't know what she's saying." But Ranger didn't move, didn't relax, didn't blink. His gaze pinned Mark to the spot. It was as if the dog were telling the entire courtroom that lies would not stand. Not here, not now, not ever. And in that moment, everyone understood. This case, long mired in uncertainty and fear, had taken a turn that no one could have predicted. The quiet courtroom was no longer quiet. It was charged with expectation, suspense, and a primal sense that the truth was about to be unearthed, not by humans, not by evidence, not by testimony, but by a 3-year-old child and a dog whose reputation for finding the unseen was legendary. The judge cleared his throat once more. We will take a brief recess," he said, voice faltering slightly. This situation requires careful handling." Deputies nodded, guiding Mark back toward a holding area, their eyes flicking nervously to Ranger. Officer Daniels whispered commands, trying to calm the dog, but Ranger's attention never wavered. The connection between child and dog was unbroken. Emma's tiny hand remained on his head, steadying him, even as the tension around them seemed to grow heavier by the second. And then, as if the universe itself held its breath, the courtroom doors closed behind the deputies and Mark Carson. Silence fell again, but this time it was different. Not the quiet of waiting, not the quiet of fear, but a charged, electric anticipation. The kind of silence that promises revelation, suspense, and the moment when hidden truths finally claw their way into the light. The judge rubbed his temples, struggling to maintain composure. "A dog," he whispered mostly to himself, "has never testified before." Emma looked down at Ranger and whispered, barely audible, "He knows." Ranger's ears twitched. His gaze remained unbroken. And in that moment, everyone understood. The courtroom would never be the same again. The courtroom was thick with tension, so dense it felt as if the walls themselves were leaning in to hear what would happen next. Every breath, every shuffle of paper, every cough seemed magnified in the silence. Ranger remained seated beside Emma, muscles coiled, eyes locked on her father. He wasn't growling anymore, not exactly, but there was a vibration in his stance, an unspoken warning that everyone could feel in their bones. Emma's small hand rested lightly on Ranger's head. She looked up at the judge, then glanced at the rows of adults, prosecutors, defense attorneys, journalists, but her gaze never lingered. Finally, in a clear, deliberate voice that carried across the silent room, she spoke again. "Show Ranger." The courtroom froze. Not just a murmur of surprise or a slight intake of breath. The room stopped. Pens hovered in midair. Cameras clicked silently, but no one dared move. The words themselves were simple, only two small words, but the implication was seismic. Emma wasn't speaking to humans. She wasn't pleading for justice or explaining herself. She was giving an instruction to the dog. Ranger's ears flicked forward, then his body tensed further. Officer Daniels crouched beside him, whispering under his breath, but Ranger ignored the commands. He didn't need them. His focus was absolute, unwavering, unbroken. His amber eyes locked onto Mark Carson, and the air between them seemed to crackle with an electric charge, invisible and undeniable. Mark Carson's face drained of all color. His lips trembled, his jaw flexing as he tried to regain control, to salvage some semblance of normalcy in the courtroom. She doesn't know what she's saying," he stammered, voice shaking. "She's confused. This is ridiculous." But Ranger didn't move. He remained seated, rigid, every muscle taut, growling low and deliberate, not a threat, not an attack, but a signal. The kind of growl that spoke volumes without a single word. "I know what you did." The judge leaned forward in his chair, fingers pressing lightly against his lips, as if to steady himself against the weight of what was unfolding. "Officer Daniels," he said cautiously, "what exactly what is Ranger indicating?" Daniels swallowed hard, voice low, tense. "Your Honor, he's alerting. He's detecting the presence of something unusual, something connected to human remains. He's never done this in a courtroom before. Not like this." The courtroom erupted into subtle chaos. Prosecutors whispered urgently to one another, their eyes wide. Defense attorneys exchanged terrified glances, their usual composure cracking under the weight of the situation. Even the deputies, trained to face danger in all its forms, shifted uneasily, recognizing the singular gravity of Ranger's alert. Emma's eyes, wide and clear, met Ranger again. She whispered, her voice almost a melody amid the tension. "Show him, he knows." The words hit Mark like a blow. His face contorted in a mixture of panic, disbelief, and fury. He had tried to control everything in this trial, his alibis, his narrative, the evidence. But a 3-year-old and a dog had just rendered all of that meaningless. What is this?" Mark croaked, voice barely audible, trembling. "This is insane. She can't, it's a child." Ranger didn't react to Mark's words. He didn't need to. He only needed Emma's guidance, and she gave it without hesitation. Slowly, deliberately, Ranger stood. The click of his claws on the polished floor echoed like distant thunder. His gaze never left Mark. Every muscle in his body screamed tension, readiness, and an unspoken declaration. Truth is about to be revealed. The courtroom gasped. Even the judge leaned back in his chair, mouth slightly open, unsure how to proceed. Emma, clutching her rabbit, remained calm in a way that seemed impossible for someone so small, so young. She whispered again, barely audible, "He knows." Ranger responded with a subtle, deliberate movement. He stepped forward slightly, pausing mid-stride, as if testing the air, confirming the presence of something hidden. The dog's body language was unmistakable to anyone trained in K9 behavior. This was a find. This was the moment when instinct and evidence converged. Mark Carson shifted in his seat, panic rising like bile in his throat. "You can't, this is ridiculous," he shouted, finally breaking, his voice cracking with desperation. "She's confused, she doesn't." But Ranger's growl cut through the courtroom, low, deliberate, controlled, and terrifying. It wasn't an attack, not yet. But it was a warning, a declaration that someone in the room had secrets, and those secrets were about to be uncovered. Emma looked up at Ranger, eyes wide, voice calm and steady beyond her years. He knows. The prosecutor leaned forward, whispering urgently to the judge. Your Honor, this is unprecedented. The dog is indicating something highly specific, something that could change the course of the trial. The judge rubbed his temples, then straightened. Proceed carefully, he said, his voice quiet, almost as if speaking any louder would shatter the fragile tension hanging in the room. Daniels, the handler, gave a quiet command. Ranger moved with precise intention, his paws clicking on the floor as he advanced slowly toward Mark Carson. Every step was deliberate, measured, and commanding. The courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Emma whispered once more, softly but with undeniable clarity, "Show Ranger." Mark Carson's hands trembled. His face was pale, his eyes darting around the courtroom as if seeking escape, any escape from the inexorable truth closing in. He opened his mouth, but no words came. He tried again. She's a child. She doesn't understand, this is. Ranger didn't flinch. He stopped a few feet from Mark, his head tilting slightly, sniffing the air, sensing the invisible threads of guilt and fear radiating from him. Every person in the room felt the tension like a physical weight pressing down on their shoulders. The press scribbled notes furiously, the stenographer's fingers flew over the keys, and deputies remained on edge, ready for any sudden move. Then the first audible murmur came from Emma. Her voice was small, trembling slightly but resolute. He took her. The words hung in the air. Every eye turned toward Mark. Every head snapped forward, ears straining to catch what the toddler had just said. Ranger's growl deepened slightly, a low, steady rumble that reverberated through the room like a distant earthquake. Mark's body stiffened, his face contorted with panic. "No," he shouted, his voice cracking. "No, that's not, I didn't." Ranger's paw shot out, touching the floor in a deliberate motion, a trained alert indicating the presence of something forbidden. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't play. It was truth. The courtroom gasped again. Murmurs rippled through the spectators. Reporters raised their cameras. Deputies instinctively moved closer to Mark, unsure whether he might flee or break down entirely. The tension was almost unbearable, thick as fog, clinging to every wall, every person, every heartbeat. Emma, small and resolute, whispered once more to Ranger, "He knows." That simple repetition, repeated 3 times now, seemed to echo around the room like a mantra, a call to truth. Ranger responded instantly, moving his body slightly, shifting his weight, sniffing the air, growling low and deliberate, a combination of alertness, instinct, and undeniable clarity. Mark Carson's composure shattered completely. He tried to speak, tried to deflect, tried to reason, but every word faltered, every gesture betrayed panic. The courtroom, for the first time, wasn't just observing a trial. It was witnessing a reckoning. The invisible web of lies, the unspoken horrors, the fears carefully hidden. Ranger had sensed them, and Emma's guidance had unlocked them. The judge, leaning forward, voice quiet but firm, finally spoke. "We will recess for the day. All proceedings stop. Officer Daniels, keep the dog calm. Deputies, ensure the defendant does not leave the premises, and we will reconvene with extreme care." Ranger's eyes never left Mark. The dog remained still, rigid, unwavering. Emma patted his head lightly, whispering, "He knows." And in that moment, the courtroom understood something profound. This wasn't just a trial. It wasn't just evidence. It wasn't just words. A 3-year-old had spoken 2 simple words, and a dog had understood them in a way no human could. Together, child and canine had shifted the balance of truth. The quiet courtroom had already begun to feel the tremors of the storm that was coming. And everyone, judge, deputies, reporters, attorneys, even Mark Carson, knew the truth. The story was far from over. The two words, simple yet seismic, had just begun to unravel the secrets everyone had tried to bury. The courtroom felt as though it had contracted into a single taut nerve. Every heartbeat, every inhale seemed magnified, echoing in the polished walls like a drum warning of something unseen. Ranger remained fixed, his eyes locked on Mark Carson. His stance was rigid, coiled with a precision that betrayed the immense weight of his instincts. Every deputy, every attorney, every reporter in the room understood the significance. Ranger had sensed something, something beyond the ordinary, something dark, dangerous, and undeniable. Mark Carson shifted in his seat, attempting a fragile smile that failed to mask the terror flickering in his eyes. This is absurd, he spat, his voice trembling. A dog, this is ridiculous. She's a child. This isn't real. Emma's voice, small but unwavering, cut through the tension. Show Ranger. It was not a plea, it was not a question. It was a command, two small words that carried the weight of unspoken truth. Ranger's ears pricked forward, muscles tightening. Officer Daniels crouched beside him, whispering reassurances, but Ranger's focus never wavered. He was aware, alert, and insistent. He knew. The judge cleared his throat, his composure strained. "Deputies," he said quietly, "please ensure the defendant remains seated. Officer Daniels, do whatever is necessary to maintain control of the animal." Ranger, however, required no command. He moved deliberately, stepping forward into the aisle. His paws clicked on the polished floor like metronomic warnings. Every movement was measured, deliberate, a combination of instinct and training that made the air in the courtroom pulse with tension. Suddenly, Ranger stopped. He planted his paws firmly, growling low, a vibration that resonated deep into the wooden floorboards. Officer Daniels whispered urgently, "He's alerting more than normal. Something here. Something connected to a missing person." The courtroom collectively inhaled, a single, unified gasp. Murmurs rippled, but no one dared speak above the weight of the moment. The prosecutor leaned forward, eyes wide, whispering, He's never done this before. He's not just alerting, he's indicating a location, something tangible." Ranger's tail stiffened, his body language unmistakable. He wasn't threatening. He wasn't attacking. He was communicating. His posture, growl, and unwavering gaze were all trained signals, indicators of human remains. Mark Carson's face paled. His hands shook visibly. He tried to stammer to reclaim control. It's a child and a dog. This is insane. But Ranger remained fixed, unyielding, a living, breathing barrier of truth. Every person in the courtroom felt the weight of the revelation forming before them. The dog was pointing, not with words, not with testimony, but with instinct, training, and an unspoken understanding of guilt and hidden horrors. Emma leaned forward slightly, small hand brushing Ranger's head. Her voice, calm and resolute beyond her years, whispered again, "He knows." Officer Daniels swallowed hard. "He's not moving until we acknowledge what he's sensing," he said under his breath. This is serious. He's pointing to the presence of something that should not be here." The judge rubbed his forehead, eyes scanning the room, attempting to process what was happening. "We will take a brief recess," he said slowly, each word measured. "The defendant will remain under supervision. Officer Daniels, please ensure the canine is controlled and deputies maintain safety." Ranger, however, was already beyond control in the traditional sense. His focus on Mark Carson was total, his alertness absolute. He was a sentinel, an unyielding force that seemed to declare without ambiguity, something hidden, something grave, something criminal is present. Mark Carson's hands trembled as he was gently guided from the courtroom. His eyes darted repeatedly to Ranger, to Emma, as if seeking some miracle escape. But there was none. He was trapped not just physically, but morally, emotionally, and now instinctually. Ranger had cut through the layers of lies and deception that had shielded him for days. The judge exhaled heavily, leaning back in his chair. "This is extraordinary. We've never." His voice trailed off, replaced by a tense silence. The courtroom collectively held its breath. Every professional protocol, every expectation of normalcy had been upended. Outside the courtroom, the tension shifted from anticipation to immediate action. Search teams were called. Officers mobilized, gathering vehicles, flashlights, and forensic kits. Rangers' behavior had triggered a cascade of emergency protocols. A missing persons alert combined with a canine's trained response could not be ignored. Emma remained in her chair, small fingers still on Ranger's head. She looked up at the dog, her eyes wide, clear, unwavering. "Show him," she whispered again. The phrase was so simple, so innocent, yet it carried the weight of life-and-death clarity. Ranger's ears twitched. His tail flicked. He knew the meaning and the urgency behind the words. The deputies escorted Mark Carson into a secure holding area. His protests echoed down the corridor, but Ranger's gaze followed him until the doors closed. Then, and only then, did Ranger shift slightly, signaling to Officer Daniels that the immediate threat was contained, but the search had only begun. Outside the courthouse, snow dusted the ground, turning streets into pale, glimmering paths. Search vehicles marked with flashing lights began to snake toward the forest that bordered the town. This was the area Mark had often wandered, where locals knew he frequented but never questioned. Ranger was loaded carefully into a specially equipped vehicle, Emma's tiny hand waving at him as he was lifted. She understood, in a way that only children and dogs seemed to, that this was the next step. The journey from instinct to truth, from suspicion to confirmation, was about to begin. The forest loomed ahead, dark and imposing. Its trees were skeletal, branches clawing at the sky, casting long shadows that twisted in the fading afternoon light. Ranger sat alert, nose twitching, ears pricked, scanning the terrain. Every scent, every rustle of leaves, every subtle vibration in the air was being catalogued, processed, interpreted. His instincts screamed that something was here, something hidden, something that the humans could not perceive without him. Officer Daniels glanced back at Emma. "You're sure?" he asked gently. Emma nodded. "He knows he will find her." The deputies, armed and tense, fanned out around the forest's edge. Flashlights cut through the shadows, painting narrow paths of light on the snow-dusted ground. Ranger's paws crunched softly over fallen leaves, branches snapping beneath him, his focus absolute. Every few steps he would pause, nose to the ground, tail stiff, eyes locked on the invisible threads of evidence that humans could not see. Hours seemed to stretch as Ranger worked. The sun dipped lower, painting the horizon with streaks of orange and purple. Shadows lengthened. The temperature dropped. Every officer felt the weight of anticipation, a silent prayer that the dog's instincts would be correct. The forest, normally serene and quiet, seemed to hold its breath as Ranger led the search deeper into the woods. Finally, Ranger halted abruptly. His paws dug into the frozen ground. His growl was low, deliberate, insistent. Officer Daniels crouched beside him, whispering, "What is it, boy?" Ranger pawed at the dirt. He sniffed. He barked sharply once, then paused, eyes flicking to the nearby trees, then back to the ground. It was the unmistakable signal. Human remains, or something connected to the missing person, were very close. The deputies quickly began to dig where Ranger had indicated. Every movement was precise, careful, methodical. The forest seemed to close in, the wind carrying the whispers of the trees like an echo of the tension in the courthouse. Emma watched from the edge, bundled in a coat far too big for her tiny frame. She clutched her rabbit tightly, voice trembling as she whispered again to Ranger, "He knows. He will find her." Ranger responded immediately, pawing the ground with renewed urgency, growling in a way that resonated deep in the chest of every officer present. The forest seemed alive, aware, as if it, too, were participating in the revelation that was about to unfold. Then, beneath a shallow layer of leaves and dirt, the deputies uncovered something, a phone partially buried, its screen flickering faintly. The timestamp indicated it had been active days after Sarah Carson's disappearance. The implications were immediate, electric, terrifying. Officer Daniels' eyes met Ranger. The dog's alertness had escalated. He was signaling that this find was not the end but a prelude. Something was still out there, something alive. Emma's mother. The thought hung in the air, unspoken yet unavoidable. Ranger pawed at the ground, barking sharply, refusing to move until the officers understood. Every step, every indication, every growl carried the same message. The missing person was near, and they were alive. The forest had swallowed its secret, but Ranger had found the trail. And with Emma's guidance, the impossible was about to become reality. The quiet courtroom had transformed into a forest of tension, and the truth, led by two small heroes, was closing in. The snow-dusted forest was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the tension that had erupted in the courtroom just hours before. Ranger led the way, his paws crunching softly over frozen leaves and brittle branches, but every officer, deputy, and agent following him knew that silence was deceptive. Danger, guilt, and secrets hid in the shadows. Every rustle of the wind through skeletal trees, every distant call of a crow, was amplified, setting nerves on edge. Emma, bundled tightly in a too-large coat, trudged alongside Officer Daniels, her tiny boots leaving imperfect prints in the thin snow. Her rabbit was clutched tightly against her chest, but she was calm. She had given the instructions, and now she trusted Ranger to do what humans couldn't. The deputies fanned out carefully, flashlights slicing through the dimming light, illuminating narrow paths through the thickening woods. Ranger paused every few steps, nose to the ground, tail stiff, ears pricked. His body language was precise, deliberate. He sniffed, pawed at the frozen dirt, then barked sharply once, a signal that the scent he was tracking had grown stronger. Officer Daniels crouched beside him, whispering, "Stay sharp, boy, we're close." Ranger's eyes flicked to Emma and then back to the path ahead. His bark was a command, a signal to continue, and the search resumed with renewed urgency. Every second felt like hours. Every crunch of snow underfoot seemed louder, heavier, as if the forest itself was pressing in. Emma's small voice broke the tension, almost inaudibly, "He knows." Ranger's ears twitched, tail flicking slightly. He was listening, understanding, and responding. The bond between child and dog was undeniable, unbreakable. Suddenly, Ranger stopped abruptly. His body went rigid, growl low and deliberate. Officer Daniels held up a hand, signaling everyone to freeze. The deputies halted mid-step, flashlights quivering in their hands. Ranger's nose twitched violently. The air felt charged, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. "What is it?" whispered one of the deputies, barely daring to speak. Daniels shook his head, whispering back, "He's found something, something significant." Ranger pawed at the snow and dirt, sniffing furiously, growl intensifying. The deputies carefully approached, hands hovering near weapons but moved cautiously, unwilling to disturb Ranger's precision. Emma stepped closer, eyes wide, whispering again, "Show him." The dog responded immediately, barking sharply, then circling a small area of disturbed earth. He sniffed again, low growl resonating through the crisp forest air. Officer Daniels knelt beside Ranger, recognizing the signs immediately. This could be it. Whatever he's found, it's close. The deputies began to dig, hands shaking slightly despite their training. Snowflakes drifted down, settling on coats and hair, but no one noticed. Each second was a heartbeat in a race against time. Ranger remained alert, scanning the surrounding woods, ensuring no one interfered with the integrity of the find. Then beneath a thin layer of leaves and frost, their hands hit something solid, a backpack partially buried. Officer Daniels pulled it free carefully. Inside, the remnants of a phone, some clothes, and a small toy rabbit were found. Recognition hit like a wave. The toy matched Emma, stolen during the abduction. Emma gasped softly, voice trembling. "It's hers, it's hers." Ranger barked again, low, insistent, almost commanding. He wasn't done. The dog's instincts screamed that the victim, Sarah Carson, was nearby, alive but in danger. Every officer's pulse quickened. This was no longer a search for evidence alone. It was a race to save a life. The forest seemed to tighten around them. Shadows stretched long, twisted by the fading sunlight. Every rustle, every distant crack of a branch sounded like a warning. Ranger led the way, sniffing rapidly, moving with a precision that was almost supernatural. The deputies followed, flashlights bobbing, hearts pounding. Emma stumbled slightly, voice small but steady. "He knows, he's close." Officer Daniels steadied her. "Yes, kiddo, he's leading us right to her." Ranger paused suddenly, ears pricked, tail stiff. He sniffed the air intensely, growl low and resonant. Then, without hesitation, he darted forward, paws flying over the uneven ground. The deputies followed in a controlled sprint, branches snapping underfoot, breaths coming in ragged gasps. Ahead, a small clearing opened, the remnants of a makeshift shelter barely visible beneath twisted branches and fallen leaves. Ranger barked sharply, circling the area. Officer Daniels approached cautiously, peering into the hollowed-out structure. Inside, huddled beneath a threadbare blanket, was Sarah Carson. Her eyes were wide with fear, lips trembling, but she was alive. Ranger barked again, low but jubilant, tail wagging as if announcing the success of his find. Emma stepped forward, small and tentative, whispering, "He knows he found her." Sarah's gaze lifted, tears welling. "Emma," she whispered, voice hoarse. Recognition, relief, and confusion intertwined. The moment was fragile yet potent, the reunion suspended in the cold forest air. Ranger's alertness never wavered. He sniffed around the perimeter, ensuring no further threat remained, ears twitching, growl ready should danger appear. Deputies approached cautiously, securing the area. Officer Daniels helped Sarah to her feet, wrapping her in a thermal blanket. Emma rushed forward, throwing her arms around her mother, sobbing. Ranger sat back, tail wagging slowly, watching over the reunion with calm satisfaction. The forest seemed to exhale, the tension dissolving slightly as the realization sank in. Sarah was alive, thanks to the extraordinary collaboration between a 3-year-old and a dog with unmatched instincts. Mark Carson, now in custody, would face the weight of his actions, exposed by innocence and instinct. But for now, the focus remained on the rescue. Ranger's training, Emma's courage, and sheer determination had converged to create a moment that would be remembered for years. Even as the deputies led Sarah safely to the awaiting vehicles, Ranger paused one last time, scanning the forest. His job wasn't done until the area was secure, until every trace of threat was accounted for. He looked back at Emma, eyes meeting hers, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The mission was a success. Emma whispered softly, almost reverently, "Thank you, Ranger." The dog's tail flicked once, a subtle, dignified acknowledgement. He had done more than follow instructions. He had sensed, guided, and protected. In his own way, he understood the gravity of what had just occurred. As the vehicles departed, the forest seemed to reclaim its quiet, the shadows stretching long as night approached. But the echoes of courage, trust, and instinct lingered, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who had witnessed the extraordinary rescue. The news would spread quickly. This was no ordinary rescue, no simple recovery. It was a story of intuition, of innocence, of the unbreakable bond between a child and a dog who understood truth in a way humans could not. And far away, in the secure holding area, Mark Carson waited, unaware that every lie, every secret, every act of violence had been exposed by 2 words: a child, and the unwavering instincts of a K-9 named Ranger. The race into the woods had ended, but the reverberations of that day would echo forever. The courtroom was transformed. Gone was the muted, tense silence of the previous hearings. In its place was a charged atmosphere of anticipation, a tangible weight that pressed on everyone's chest. The press, now fully aware of Sarah Carson's miraculous discovery, filled the room with murmurs and flashing cameras. Every seat was occupied, and the air vibrated with a collective sense that something extraordinary and horrifying was about to unfold. Emma sat at the edge of her chair, small fingers wrapped tightly around her rabbit. Ranger rested beside her, calm but alert, tail occasionally brushing the floor. His presence alone seemed to demand respect. Everyone in the courtroom instinctively gave him space. The dog had become more than a tool of justice. He was a witness, a guardian, and a symbol of the truth that could no longer be ignored. Mark Carson was brought back into the room, escorted by 2 deputies. His hands were cuffed in front of him, but the tension radiating off him was palpable. He tried to maintain a facade of composure, though the pallor of fear had overtaken his usual arrogance. His eyes darted around the courtroom, finally landing on Ranger and then on Emma. A shiver ran down his spine. He understood, in a gut-wrenching way, that the lies he had woven for months were unraveling. The judge entered, gavel in hand, and called the room to order. "We reconvene this hearing with the utmost seriousness. Recent developments have brought to light evidence that was previously unavailable. This courtroom will proceed carefully, acknowledging both the extraordinary circumstances and the gravity of the accusations at hand." Emma's mother, Sarah, sat beside her now, wrapped in a blanket still damp with the forest cold. Her eyes were red from crying, but there was a spark of determination in her gaze. The rescue had shaken her to the core, yet it had also galvanized her resolve. She would testify, she would face Mark Carson, and she would finally see justice for the months of fear and uncertainty. The prosecutor rose, clearing his throat, papers rustling in a manner that punctuated the tension in the room. "Your Honor, what has been discovered through the diligent efforts of law enforcement and the extraordinary instincts of a trained K-9 officer has brought us to a point where the defendant's actions can no longer be concealed. Evidence recovered from the woods, combined with direct eyewitness accounts from a 3-year-old, establish a clear and undeniable narrative of abduction, concealment, and intent to harm." Mark Carson's face twisted. His lips quivered and he swallowed repeatedly, eyes darting around for any semblance of escape. This is impossible," he shouted, voice cracking. "A child, a dog, you're all insane." Ranger shifted slightly, ears pricked, and growled low, not aggressive but warning. His gaze never left Mark, a silent declaration of truth. "We know what you did and we have proof." Emma's small voice broke the tension, calm and deliberate. "He knows." The words, repeated again in the courtroom, caused a ripple of shock. Everyone in attendance froze, understanding that the child was speaking not to them, but to the dog, and the dog understood. The invisible bond between innocence and instinct had revealed what months of investigation alone could not. Officer Daniels leaned close to Ranger, whispering instructions. The dog responded with a subtle shift, pawing the ground toward the display table where the recovered backpack, phone, and other items had been placed. Each item was evidence of Mark Carson's crimes, but Ranger's indication suggested there was more, something still concealed, something that required acknowledgement before the truth could be fully faced. The judge raised an eyebrow, glancing toward the prosecutor. "Do you intend to introduce the recovered evidence at this time?" "Yes, Your Honor," the prosecutor replied, voice firm. Additionally, the K-9 officer's alert and behavior in the field, corroborated by Emma Carson's direction, provide critical context. The court must recognize that this is not a matter of speculation. The dog's signals and the child's words directly led to the recovery of the missing person and associated items. Mark Carson's protests became frantic. This is manipulation. You can't use a child's words or a dog as evidence." The judge raised a hand. "Silence. The court acknowledges that this is unprecedented. However, the facts are undeniable. The defendant's actions led to the abduction and concealment of a minor. The recovery of evidence directly linked to these actions cannot be dismissed. Ranger stood, alert, moving slightly toward Mark. Every muscle in his body conveyed certainty, focus, and a readiness to act if necessary. His presence alone shifted the energy in the courtroom. Mark's gaze faltered, panic overtaking arrogance. The prosecutor continued, "Your Honor, we have eyewitness testimony from the child, corroborated by the canine's behavior, and physical evidence recovered as a direct result. Together, this establishes a chain of events that cannot be ignored." Emma, small yet unyielding, spoke again, whispering to Ranger, "He knows, he will tell." The dog responded with a subtle pawing motion toward the recovered backpack, as if emphasizing that the evidence spoke volumes. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, reality itself felt suspended. Everyone was aware of the extraordinary nature of the situation. A child and a dog had become instruments of justice, piercing through layers of deception and fear. Mark Carson slumped slightly in his chair, eyes wide, voice shaking. "No, no, you can't, this isn't real." Sarah Carson, standing now, voice firm and unwavering, addressed the court. "It's real. It's all real. For months my daughter was taken. Every day we feared the worst. But today, thanks to Emma and Ranger, we know the truth and we will not let it go unpunished." Tears glistened in her eyes, but there was an undeniable strength in her posture. She moved to present the recovered evidence. The backpack, phone, and small toys were displayed on the table, each item a testament to the hidden horrors. The room seemed to vibrate with the weight of what had been uncovered. Officer Daniels explained the significance of Ranger's actions. The dog's behavior was precise and deliberate. Each alert, each movement, corresponded directly to items or locations associated with the abduction. This is not conjecture. It is trained instinct and proven evidence in real time. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Your Honor, we must consider the psychological weight of this situation. The child's ability to communicate specific instructions, combined with the K-9 officer's responses, directly led to the recovery of a missing person. The defendant's knowledge of the crime, attempts to conceal it, and present panic all reinforce the chain of evidence." The judge sighed, reviewing notes, then looked up at Mark Carson. "You are now in a position where denial is no longer plausible. The evidence is irrefutable, the witness testimony direct, and the canine's behavior scientifically validated. Do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Mark's face was ashen. He opened his mouth, then closed it. His hands shook visibly. No words came. The courtroom waited, breath held, as he sat in stunned silence. For the first time, the illusion of control he had maintained was completely shattered. Emma watched silently, small but resolute. Ranger sat beside her, tail slowly wagging in approval. Together, they had done more than assist in a rescue. They had ensured that truth could not be evaded. The judge leaned back, voice measured but firm. "Given the extraordinary circumstances, the court acknowledges the unique role of both the child and the K-9 officer in bringing clarity to this case. Proceedings will continue with the understanding that these findings are critical to the pursuit of justice." Mark Carson's eyes darted around, seeing the courtroom as a cage. The evidence, the recovered items, the testimony, and the dog's unwavering alertness all converged to strip away every defense he had hoped would protect him. Panic edged into terror. The room remained tense, a charged energy lingering over everyone present. The revelation of truth was no longer abstract. It was immediate, inescapable, and undeniable. Every person in the courtroom understood that the events of that day, Emma's words, Ranger's instincts, and Sarah's recovery, had shifted the course of justice forever. Even as the court recessed for a brief pause, the murmurs of the audience reflected a mix of awe, disbelief, and gratitude. Social media would soon erupt. Headlines would scream of a 3-year-old and a K-9 officer who unraveled the truth, and the world would watch as an unprecedented story of courage, instinct, and justice unfolded. Emma whispered to Ranger, small and gentle, "We did it, he knows." The dog responded with a quiet, deliberate bark, tail flicking in a subtle salute. The courtroom, charged with tension and revelation, seemed to exhale. The reckoning had begun, and no secret, no lie, no hidden crime could escape the light that had been brought into the world by two unlikely heroes. The truth, once hidden in shadows, was now fully exposed, and the consequences would be absolute. The courtroom felt smaller now, suffused with an electric tension that made every breath seem audible. Mark Carson sat in his chair, slouched, but every muscle in his body was taut, ready to bolt or to break down, whichever came first. His hands, still cuffed, trembled slightly as he glanced at the evidence table where the recovered items lay in stark testament to his crimes. The backpack, the phone, and the small, snow-dusted toys were silent witnesses, each one screaming truths that he had tried desperately to bury. Ranger sat rigidly beside Emma, tail low but alert, ears twitching at every subtle movement in the room. The dog had been a quiet presence for hours, a sentinel of justice. But now, in this final moment before truth and consequence collided, Ranger's focus sharpened. His gaze bore into Mark, unflinching, unrelenting. Emma, small yet unwavering, clutched her rabbit and whispered under her breath, "He knows. He can't hide it anymore." Mark's eyes flicked toward the child, and for the first time fear replaced his smirk. He realized the stakes. He had counted on disbelief, confusion, and procedural gaps to protect him. He had not accounted for Emma's clarity, Ranger's instinct, or the overwhelming weight of truth they wielded together. The judge's gavel struck, cutting through the murmurs of the room. "This court will proceed. Mr. Carson, you are now required to respond to the evidence presented and the testimony given. Be aware that any attempt to deceive this court further will be noted and acted upon accordingly." Mark swallowed hard, voice faltering as he tried to maintain a semblance of composure. I did, he trailed off, eyes darting around the room, landing on Ranger. The dog's presence was a silent indictment. Every trained instinct of the K-9 seemed to pronounce judgment, and Mark knew it. Officer Daniel stepped forward calmly, but his eyes were sharp. "Your Honor, the K-9 officer's behavior directly corresponds with multiple locations and evidence points associated with Mr. Carson's actions. Ranger's indications are precise, deliberate, and scientifically validated. They cannot be ignored in this proceeding." Mark Carson's face went pale, sweat beaded at his temples. He shifted in his seat, fumbling over his words. This is manipulation. It's impossible. A dog, a child, you ca." Ranger growled low and steady, a sound that resonated through the courtroom. It wasn't aggression toward the people. It was aggression toward lies, toward deception, toward the invisible walls Mark Carson had constructed around his guilt. The room seemed to lean in, every person sensing the dog's singular focus, feeling the invisible force of truth pressing down on the accused. Emma, small but ferocious in her clarity, leaned slightly forward and said, "He knows. He will tell the truth." The words, repeated, were a lightning strike in the room. Murmurs arose, but no one dared question them. They were not mere words. They were a conduit, a bridge between innocence and instinct, compelling even the most hardened to recognize the undeniable. Mark Carson's hands trembled, gripping the arms of his chair as he finally broke. It was an accident. I didn't mean to," his voice cracked, faltering as he realized the courtroom could not accept his excuses. The evidence, the recovered items, Ranger's signals, and Emma's testimony combined to create a net of truth that was inescapable. The prosecutor stood, voice firm and unrelenting. "Your Honor," the defendant's repeated attempts to conceal his actions, combined with the direct evidence recovered, and the K-9's precise alerts, clearly establish intent, concealment, and culpability. The child's testimony corroborates this evidence and demonstrates the chain of events that led to the victim's endangerment. Mark Carson's protests grew louder, more desperate. "No, I didn't mean to. It was an accident." Ranger shifted slightly, stepping closer to Mark, paws firm, eyes locked. Every muscle in the dog's body communicated one message: lies will not protect you. Truth is here, and it will not be denied. Emma whispered again, small but resolute. "He knows. He has to say it." The child's words were almost hypnotic in their effect. Mark's facade was cracking, his control evaporating. Ranger's quiet insistence, combined with Emma's unwavering presence, forced the truth to the surface. Trembling, tears streaking his face, Mark finally began to speak with a clarity that betrayed desperation and guilt. I didn't know it would go that far. His words faltered, but the weight of evidence pressed him forward. The courtroom leaned in, silence hanging thick as dust, waiting for the confession that would finally break the illusion. Ranger growled low again, subtly pawing the ground near the evidence table, signaling the precise locations and items that corroborated Mark's admission. The court reporters scribbled furiously, the attorneys leaned forward, and the judge's gaze sharpened. Mark's voice finally steadied, broken and raw. I took her. I didn't mean to hurt her. I hid her. I didn't know she would get hurt. I panicked. Emma's small hand brushed Ranger's head. The dog responded with a subtle flick of his tail, as if acknowledging that the truth had finally been spoken. The room was heavy with the emotional weight of revelation. Sarah Carson sobbed quietly, wrapping her arms around her daughter, while the courtroom absorbed the raw, horrific clarity of what had transpired. The prosecutor nodded at the judge, voice steady. "Your Honor, the defendant has now admitted to actions that endangered a minor, concealed evidence, and attempted to obstruct justice. This admission, combined with the physical evidence and the K-9 officer's precise alerts, confirms the charges in their entirety." Mark Carson's face was a mask of despair. Every attempt at denial had failed. Every lie, every manipulation, every calculated maneuver had been dismantled by a combination of instinct, innocence, and undeniable evidence. Ranger's presence remained commanding. The dog had guided this courtroom to truth, his instincts translating into a silent, authoritative narrative that left no space for doubt. The bond between Emma and Ranger was evident to all, an unspoken understanding that justice had been served, at least in the discovery of truth. The judge took a deep breath, voice firm and unwavering. This court recognizes the extraordinary circumstances under which the truth has been revealed. The defendant's confession, corroborated by the K-9 officer's precise indications and the testimony of a direct witness, leaves no question regarding culpability. Proceedings will move toward the imposition of justice consistent with these findings. Mark Carson's body slumped, utterly defeated. He had been confronted not by conventional forces alone, but by the combined power of innocence and instinct. Ranger's gaze never wavered, small eyes reflecting unwavering certainty. The courtroom felt the weight of the resolution, a reckoning that was both inevitable and extraordinary. Emma whispered softly, almost reverently to Ranger, "He knows, justice is coming." The dog responded with a quiet bark, tail flicking in subtle affirmation. He had done more than follow commands. He had sensed, guided, and ensured that truth could no longer be hidden. Outside, the press would later describe the scene as miraculous, cinematic, and extraordinary. But inside the courtroom, the raw human emotions, the fear, the terror, the courage, the love, and the unyielding pursuit of truth, were far more potent than any story could capture. Mark Carson would face the consequences of his actions. The law would proceed, reinforced by evidence, testimony, and the undeniable proof that had emerged. But the true story, the story of a 3-year-old girl, a courageous mother, and a dog with instincts that transcended ordinary understanding, would resonate far beyond the walls of the courtroom. Ranger remained at Emma's side, a sentinel, a guide, and a quiet hero. His presence had been crucial, his instincts irreplaceable, his loyalty absolute. Emma, small yet monumental in her courage, had spoken the words that activated this extraordinary chain of events. Together, they had uncovered the truth in a way that human efforts alone could not have achieved. The courtroom exhaled collectively, the tension finally easing, but the intensity of the final confrontation would linger in every heart present. The truth had been faced, lies had been shattered, justice, guided by innocence and instinct, was now inevitable. The final confrontation was over, but the story of courage, trust, and extraordinary instincts would echo forever. The courtroom, once a crucible of fear and tension, had transformed into a space of quiet resolution. The echoes of Mark Carson's breakdown still lingered, a palpable reminder of the weight of truth. Every seat was occupied, but now the atmosphere carried a subtle release, a fragile sense that justice had finally begun to take its rightful course. Ranger remained steadfast beside Emma, his presence a constant anchor in the sea of emotions. The dog's ears twitched at every shuffle, every cough, every murmur, though he no longer needed to guide the search. The danger had passed, the missing person was safe, and the defendant had confessed. Yet the dog's vigilance reflected the truth. Even victory required respect for what had been endured. Emma sat tall, small hands resting on Ranger's back, eyes bright despite the tears streaking her cheeks. She had been thrust into a world far beyond her years, and yet she had faced it with courage that left every adult in the room in awe. Her mother, Sarah, now fully recovered from the shock of the rescue, leaned close to her daughter, voice soft but firm. "You were incredible, Emma, braver than anyone could have imagined." Emma whispered, her words barely audible. "We did it," Ranger knew. The dog's tail flicked gently in acknowledgement, a subtle confirmation that the bond between child and canine had been at the heart of the entire ordeal. This quiet moment, small yet monumental, was the culmination of months of fear, uncertainty, and relentless pursuit of truth. The judge cleared his throat, breaking the momentary pause. Given the evidence presented, the testimony provided, and the extraordinary circumstances surrounding this case, this court finds the defendant guilty of abduction, concealment, and endangerment. Sentencing will be scheduled, taking into account the severity of the offenses and the profound impact on the victim and her family. Mark Carson sat slumped, eyes hollow, his body a reflection of defeat. The courtroom's silence was oppressive, but there was no sympathy for him here. Every lie had been stripped away, every secret uncovered, and the truth had triumphed. The weight of justice, carried by the courage of a child and the instincts of a dog, now rested squarely upon his shoulders. Outside the courtroom, the press swarmed, eager to capture the story that had already gone viral. Headlines would scream of a 3-year-old girl who had, with the help of a K-9 officer, led authorities to a missing person and exposed a criminal. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, but Emma and Ranger remained calm, almost serene in the eye of the storm. Sarah held her daughter tightly, whispering reassurances, while Officer Daniels knelt beside Ranger, gently patting his head. "You did something extraordinary, boy," he murmured. "You saved a life and you helped bring justice." Ranger's tail flicked in response, eyes scanning the crowd but always returning to Emma, the one who had guided him with words and trust. As the crowd began to disperse, Emma looked up at her mother, voice small but unwavering. "Mom, he knows now. He can't lie anymore." Sarah nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes, sweetheart, he knows, and now he can't hurt anyone else." The media cameras captured every detail, but none could truly encapsulate the depth of what had transpired. A child's words, a dog's instincts, and a mother's determination had combined to expose evil that had been hidden for far too long. The story would spread across the nation, inspiring awe, hope, and a renewed belief in the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. In the quiet moments that followed, the family returned home, a place that had once been filled with fear but now radiated warmth and safety. Emma clutched her rabbit tightly, but the weight on her small shoulders had lifted. Ranger followed closely, tail swishing lazily, but always alert to his young partner's needs. Sarah sat beside Emma on the couch, her voice soft. "Do you understand, honey? You were a hero today. You helped save me, and you helped make sure he couldn't hurt anyone again." Emma nodded, small hands resting on the rabbit. Ranger knew he knew everything. The dog lay down beside them, head resting gently on Emma's lap. The bond between them was unspoken but absolute, a living testament to courage, trust, and loyalty. In that quiet moment, the chaos of the courtroom, the terror of the forest, and the weight of months of fear seemed to melt away, leaving only the profound connection between child and canine. Weeks later, the sentencing took place. Mark Carson was handed a lengthy prison term, the maximum allowed under the law for his offenses. The courtroom was filled with reporters, law enforcement, and community members, all bearing witness to the final act of justice. Ranger attended, sitting quietly beside Emma, who held her rabbit with the same calm determination that had guided them both through the darkest moments. The judge's words were solemn but resolute. "Let this sentence serve as a reminder that justice will prevail, that courage, whether in a child or a trained canine, can illuminate truth, and that those who attempt to hide their crimes will ultimately face the consequences." Mark Carson's expression remained vacant, the weight of his actions fully realized. For him, there was no escape, no denial, only the stark reality of justice. Outside, media coverage captured the awe of the public, but within the courtroom, the true story was known to all. A story of bravery, instinct, and unyielding truth. At home, Emma and Sarah shared a quiet evening. The fireplace glowed softly, casting long shadows across the room. Ranger lay at Emma's feet, ears twitching occasionally, but otherwise at peace. The trauma of the past months had left its mark, but the triumph of courage and loyalty was undeniable. Emma hugged her rabbit tightly, eyes wide with thought. "Mom, Ranger, he helped me. We did it together." Sarah kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Yes, baby, together you saved me, and together you helped bring him to justice. You've done something incredible, something that will never be forgotten." The quiet of the house was comforting, a stark contrast to the chaos of the courtroom, the forest, and the months of fear. But beneath the calm lay a profound truth. Courage could come in the smallest packages, loyalty could transcend species, and innocence could wield power that no deception could withstand. Ranger let out a soft sigh, resting his head fully on Emma's lap. He had fulfilled his duty, guided by instinct and trust, but he also had provided something far more profound, a bridge between fear and safety, between doubt and truth. Emma stroked his fur, her small fingers tracing the lines of his strong, capable body. The city would remember the story for years. 3-year-old words that led a dog to uncover a crime, a mother rescued from terror, and a criminal finally brought to justice. Social media would replay every moment, news outlets would highlight the bravery, and the public would marvel at the bond that had altered the course of events. But for Emma, Sarah, and Ranger, it was quieter, more intimate. It was the safety of home, the warmth of family, and the unspoken understanding that they had faced unimaginable darkness together and emerged victorious. Emma looked down at Ranger, whispering, "We did it. He can't hurt anyone again." The dog's eyes met hers, calm and steady, tail flicking once in affirmation. In that glance there was a promise, protection, loyalty, and vigilance. A promise that no matter what challenges came next, they would face them together. Outside, the world buzzed with the story, but inside, the trio shared a quiet, profound victory. Justice had been served, courage had been recognized, and bonds, human and canine, had proven stronger than fear, deception, or violence. In the glow of the evening, with firelight dancing across the walls, Sarah whispered, voice soft but resolute, "You've changed the world, Emma. And Ranger, you've changed it too." Emma hugged her rabbit tightly, eyes closed, head resting gently against her mother. Ranger lay at their feet, silent but vigilant, the unsung hero of a story that would live forever in the hearts of those who witnessed it. The ordeal was over, the danger vanquished, the truth revealed, and in the quiet reflection of home, love, courage, and loyalty prevailed, forever unbroken.